Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of Earth's dawn and watched the massive alien ship approach through the darkness of space. The vessel was 3 times larger than his own ship and covered in smooth metal that seemed to glow with its own light. He had been exploring the outer edges of human space for 2 years, but nothing had prepared him for this moment. The first contact with an alien race was finally happening, and Jake felt his heart beating faster as he waited for whatever would come next. The alien ship moved with grace that made Jake's own vessel look clumsy and slow. Earth's Dawn was a good ship, but it was built for function, not beauty. The hull was thick and gray with visible joints where the armor plates connected. The engines were large and powerful, but they made noise and left bright trails in space that anyone could see from, far away. Everything about the human ship screamed that it was made by a race that was still learning how to travel between the stars. Admiral Lisa Carter stood beside Jake and watched the alien ship with careful eyes. She had been chosen to lead this first contact because she was smart and could think fast when things went wrong. Lisa had studied every piece of information they had about possible alien contact, and she knew that first impressions would matter more than anything else. She also knew that sometimes it was better to appear weak than to show your true strength too early. The communication system crackled to life, and a deep voice filled the bridge. The words were strange at first, but the computer quickly began to translate them into English. Unknown vessel, you will stop your movement and prepare to be boarded. I am War Commander Thekval of the Zephyrian Empire. You have entered space that belongs to us, and you must explain your presence here. Jake looked at Lisa and saw her nod slightly. They had talked about this moment many times, and they both knew what they had to do. Jake pressed the communication button and spoke in a voice that sounded nervous and unsure. This is Captain Jake Morrison of the human vessel Earth's Dawn. We are explorers from the planet Earth, and we mean no harm. We did not know this space belonged to anyone, and we will leave if you want us to. There was silence for a long moment, and then the alien voice returned. This time it sounded amused and slightly bored. Humans, another weak race that builds slow ships and begs for mercy when they meet their betters. You will come aboard our vessel and explain what your kind wants in our space. Do not try to run or we will destroy you without effort. A bright beam of light reached out from the alien ship and locked onto Earth's dawn. Jake felt his ship being pulled forward against his will, and he knew that fighting would be useless. The alien technology was clearly far beyond anything humans had built. At least that was what the aliens would think when they saw how easily they could control his ship. As they moved closer to the alien vessel, Jake could see more details of its construction. The hull was perfectly smooth, without any visible seams or joints. The weapons were sleek and deadly-looking, and there seemed to be hundreds of them placed all along the ship's sides. Everything about the vessel spoke of a race that had been building warships for thousands of years and had perfected the art of destruction. Lisa whispered to Jake as they prepared to board the alien ship. Remember what we talked about. Let them think we are primitive and harmless. Show them our basic technology, but nothing more. Act impressed by everything you see and ask simple questions like you don't understand how their systems work. Jake nodded and made sure his uniform looked slightly worn and his equipment appeared outdated. The humans had spent months preparing for this moment, and every detail had been planned. The ship they traveled in was real, but it was also carefully designed to look less advanced than it actually was. The engines were louder than they needed to be, and the computers were slower than the best human technology could manage. When they finally stepped onto the alien ship, Jake was amazed by what he saw. The corridors were wide and tall with walls. That seemed to be made from a single piece of metal. Lights moved along the ceiling in patterns that were beautiful and complex. The air smelled clean and fresh, and the temperature was perfect. Everything around them showed that the Zephyrians were indeed a highly advanced race. War Commander Thekval was waiting for them in a large room filled with screens and control panels. He was tall and muscular, with skin that had a slight blue tint. His eyes were large and dark, and when he looked at the humans, there was clear contempt in his expression. He wore armor that looked both beautiful and deadly, and carried weapons that hummed with barely contained energy. The war commander walked around Jake and Lisa like he was examining animals in a zoo. He poked at their equipment with one clawed finger and made disapproving sounds. "So these are humans. You are smaller than I expected, and your technology is even more primitive than our scouts reported. How did your race ever manage to leave your home planet with such crude machines?" Lisa stepped forward and bowed slightly. "We are still learning, War Commander. Our people have only been traveling in space for a short time, and we know we have much to learn from races like yours that have clearly mastered the stars." War Commander Thekval stood in the command center of his flagship and looked at the blue planet Earth hanging in space before him. 200 Zephyrian warships surrounded the world in a formation that had brought fear to dozens of other planets. Each ship was a masterpiece of destruction, capable of turning continents to glass with their advanced weapons. The sight of such overwhelming force had always been enough to make other races surrender without firing a single shot. The war commander activated the communication system that would broadcast his message to every human settlement across their world. His voice was deep and commanding as he spoke the words that had become familiar to him over the years. "People of Earth, I am War Commander Thekval of the Zephyrian Empire. Your world now belongs to us, and you will submit to our rule immediately. Any resistance will result in the complete destruction of your cities and the death of millions of your kind." On the hidden Luna Base facility, Dr. Alex Turner watched the alien fleet through sensors that the Zephyrians could not detect. The base had been built inside an old mining tunnel and covered with technology that made it invisible to most scanning systems. Alex had been waiting for this day for over 30 years, ever since human deep space monitors had first detected signs of an aggressive alien empire expanding toward Earth. The main command room was filled with screens showing every detail of the Zephyrian fleet. Alex could see the power levels of their shields, the rotation patterns of their ships, and even the heat signatures from their weapon systems. All of this information was being gathered by human technology that was far more advanced than anything the aliens had seen. The Zephyrians thought they were dealing with a primitive race, but they had no idea how wrong they were. Colonel Ryan Davis led his intelligence team through the data they had collected during the first contact meetings. His people had been analyzing every word, every gesture, and every piece of technology the Zephyrians had revealed. Kelly Rogers sat at a computer terminal reviewing the structural scans of Zephyrian ships, while Ben Parker worked on translating the more complex parts of their language that the basic systems had missed. Ryan looked at the information his team had gathered and felt confident that Operation Nightfall would succeed. The Zephyrians were powerful, but they were also predictable. They followed the same patterns on every world they conquered, and they never expected their enemies to be anything more than what they appeared to be. That arrogance would be their downfall. President Martha Lewis sat in the secure bunker beneath the White House and listened to her advisors debate the next move. Some wanted to fight immediately, while others suggested trying to negotiate with the aliens. Martha had already made her decision, but she needed to make sure everyone understood what was about to happen. The plan they had developed was dangerous, and if it failed, humanity would face complete destruction. Martha activated the emergency broadcast system and appeared on screens across the world. Her face was calm, but her voice carried the weight of the moment as she spoke to her people. "Citizens of Earth, we face a choice that will determine the future of our race. The aliens who have come to our world demand our surrender and threaten to destroy us if we resist. After careful consideration, I have decided that we must accept their terms to save human lives." The announcement caused panic in some cities and anger in others. People gathered in the streets demanding that Earth fight back against the invaders. They did not know that their leaders had been preparing for this moment for decades, and that the surrender was all part of a larger plan. Only a few hundred people across the entire planet knew the truth about what was really going to happen. War Commander Thek Val received the human surrender message and allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. Another world had fallen to the might of the Zephyrian Empire without requiring a costly battle. His ships moved into standard occupation positions around the planet, while his ground forces prepared to establish control centers in the major human cities. The occupation began immediately, and the Zephyrians wasted no time in showing the humans their place in the new order. They set up mining operations on the moon and began strip mining operations to extract the resources they needed. Human workers were forced to labor in dangerous conditions, while Zephyrian overseers watched them with weapons ready to fire at, the first sign of trouble. Dr. Rachel Kim worked in the hidden Nevada test facility, where humanity's most advanced weapons were being prepared for the coming battle. The facility had been built deep underground and disguised as a simple research station. For 30 years, the brightest human minds had been developing technology that would give them an edge against any alien threat they might face. Rachel looked at the latest reports from the test runs and smiled with satisfaction. The quantum torpedoes were working perfectly, and the plasma cannons had exceeded all expectations. The shield disruptors that Dr. Amanda Foster had designed were ready for deployment, and the stealth systems were operating without any problems. Everything was ready for Operation Nightfall to begin. Commander Steve Johnson walked through the hidden shipyard in the asteroid belt where the Shadow Fleet was making final preparations. 50 ships hung in the darkness, each one invisible to conventional sensors and armed with weapons that could destroy targets light years away. These vessels had been built in secret over the past decade, using materials and technology that the Zephyrians did not know existed. Steve looked at his crew and saw the determination in their eyes. They had trained for this mission their entire careers, and now the moment had finally arrived. In less than 72 hours, they would use quantum drives to travel instantly to the Zephyrian homeworld and begin the attack that would end the war before it could really start. Paul Anderson continued his work at the lunar mining facility, where he had been placed to oversee human workers. The Zephyrians thought he was just another engineer, but Paul was actually gathering detailed information about their technology and sending it back to Earth through hidden communication channels. Every weakness he discovered would be used against them when the time came. The Zephyrians grew more confident with each passing day as they established their control over Earth and its people. They had conquered so many worlds that the process had become routine for them. They never suspected that this time they had made a terrible mistake and that their easy victory was about to become their greatest defeat. 3 weeks after the Zephyrian occupation began, the aliens had settled into their routine of controlling Earth and its people. They had established command centers in major cities and forced millions of humans to work in mining operations that stripped resources from the planet. War Commander Thek Val spent his days in his orbital station planning the next phase of expansion, while his soldiers enforced brutal discipline on the human population below. Dr. Rachel Kim stood in the deepest level of the Nevada test facility and watched as the final components of Operation Nightfall were assembled. The underground complex stretched for miles in every direction and contained laboratories that would have amazed the Zephyrians if they had known such places existed. Rachel had spent 15 years developing the weapon systems that would soon be used against the alien fleet, and every test had exceeded their expectations. The quantum torpedoes were small devices that could travel through space at impossible speeds and pass through most known shield systems without being detected. Each torpedo carried enough explosive power to destroy a ship 10 times larger than the biggest Zephyrian vessel. Rachel had designed them specifically to target the weak points in alien ship construction that Paul Anderson had identified during his intelligence-gathering operations. Commander Steve Johnson walked through the main hangar of Shadow Base Alpha, where 50 of humanity's most advanced warships waited in perfect silence. The ships were built using stealth technology that made them completely invisible to Zephyrian sensors. Their hulls were covered in a special material that absorbed energy instead of reflecting it, and their engines produced no heat signature that could be tracked by enemy systems. Steve looked at the Shadow Fleet and felt pride in what human engineering had accomplished. Each ship was armed with weapons that drew power directly from quantum space and could fire continuously for hours without needing to reload. The plasma cannons could melt through the strongest alien armor, and the neural disruptors could shut down enemy computer systems from a distance of several light years. The crews of the Shadow Fleet had been training for this mission for over 5 years. They knew every detail of Zephyrian ship design and had practiced the attack patterns they would use during Operation Nightfall. Each pilot could navigate through enemy formations without being seen, and each gunner could hit targets with perfect accuracy even while moving at incredible speeds. Dr. Amanda Foster worked in her laboratory, studying the data that intelligence teams had gathered about Zephyrian shield technology. She had discovered that all alien shields operated on the same basic frequency, and that they could be disrupted using precisely calibrated electromagnetic pulses. Amanda had designed a device that could generate these pulses and transmit them across vast distances to disable entire fleets of enemy ships. The shield disruptors were small enough to be carried by individual soldiers, but powerful enough to bring down the defenses of a capital ship. Amanda had tested them against captured Zephyrian equipment, and the results had been perfect every time. Once the shields were down, the alien ships would be defenseless against human weapons that had been designed specifically to exploit their weaknesses. Paul Anderson continued his work at the lunar mining facility, where he maintained his cover as a simple human engineer. The Zephyrians had grown comfortable with his presence and no longer watched him closely as he moved through their installations. This gave Paul the freedom he needed to gather detailed information about their technology and transmit it back to Earth through hidden communication channels. Paul had discovered that the Zephyrians used a centralized computer system to control all of their operations. Every ship, every weapon, and every communication device was connected to a master network that could be accessed from any major command center. If human forces could gain control of this network, they would be able to turn the alien technology against itself and create chaos throughout the entire Zephyrian fleet. Dr. Kevin Brown led the Cyber Warfare Division from a hidden facility beneath the Pacific Ocean. His team had spent months developing computer viruses that could infiltrate Zephyrian systems without being detected. These viruses were hidden inside seemingly harmless data packets that the aliens received during routine communication exchanges with their human slaves. The viruses were designed to remain dormant until they received a specific activation signal. When that signal was sent, they would simultaneously attack every connected system in the Zephyrian network. Communication systems would fail, navigation computers would provide false readings, and weapons would target their own ships. The resulting chaos would give human forces the advantage they needed to win the battle. Kelly Rogers worked with Ben Parker to analyze every piece of information they had gathered about Zephyrian military doctrine. They had identified patterns in alien behavior that could be used to predict their responses during combat. The Zephyrians always followed the same basic strategies, and they never adapted quickly to unexpected situations. Kelly had discovered that the aliens relied heavily on their technological superiority and rarely developed backup plans for situations where their equipment failed. They also had a rigid command structure that made it difficult for individual ship captains to make independent decisions during battle. These weaknesses would be exploited during Operation Nightfall to maximum effect. The Zephyrians continued their occupation of Earth without any awareness that they were being studied and analyzed by an enemy they had underestimated. They forced human workers to extract resources from the planet while their own forces enjoyed the luxuries of their advanced technology. War Commander Thek Val received regular reports about the success of the occupation and began planning the next phase of expansion into human space. Captain Nicole Wright led the advance reconnaissance team that would travel to Zephyr Prime before the main attack began. Her ship was equipped with an experimental quantum drive that could transport it across the galaxy in minutes rather than years. The reconnaissance mission would confirm the location of key targets on the Zephyrian homeworld and ensure that the attack force could strike with maximum effectiveness. Nicole had studied every available piece of information about Zephyr Prime and knew the planet better than many of the aliens who lived there. She had identified the locations of major military installations, government centers, and communication facilities that would need to be captured or destroyed during the attack. Her team would also gather real-time intelligence about enemy defenses and troop movements. The final preparations for Operation Nightfall continued in secret facilities across human space, while the Zephyrians remained completely unaware of the danger they faced. In less than 48 hours, the aliens would discover that they had made the greatest mistake in their history when they chose to underestimate the quiet determination and hidden strength of the human race. General Chris Taylor stood in the main command center of Luna Base and looked at the massive holographic display that showed the positions of human forces throughout the galaxy. Operation Nightfall was about to begin, and every element of the plan had to work perfectly for humanity to achieve victory. Chris had coordinated military operations for 20 years, but nothing had prepared him for the complexity of this mission. The plan was audacious in its scope and timing. Human forces would simultaneously attack the Zephyrian homeworld of Zephyr Prime and the occupation fleet around Earth. The attacks would begin during the Festival of Conquest, when most of the alien military would be celebrating their recent victory over humanity. The Zephyrians would never expect their enemies to strike during their moment of greatest triumph. Captain Nicole Wright activated the quantum drive on her reconnaissance vessel and felt the strange sensation of traveling across impossible distances in mere seconds. One moment she was hidden in the asteroid belt beyond Pluto, and the next she was approaching the outer edge of the Zephyr system. Her ship remained completely invisible to alien sensors as she began gathering the final intelligence needed for the attack. Zephyr Prime was a beautiful world covered in blue oceans and green continents that reminded Nicole of Earth. The planet was surrounded by massive orbital stations that served as both defensive platforms and celebration centers for the Festival of Conquest. Thousands of Zephyrian ships filled the space around their home world as warriors from across the Empire gathered to honor their latest victory. Nicole studied the orbital defenses and confirmed what human intelligence had predicted. The Zephyrians had become so confident in their superiority that they had reduced their defensive preparations to make room for more celebration platforms. Their shield generators were operating at minimum power, and most of their weapon systems were offline. To conserve energy for the festival displays, Dr. Kevin Brown made the final adjustments to the cyber warfare systems that would cripple Zephyrian communications during the attack. His viruses had been lying dormant in alien computer networks for weeks, waiting for the activation signal. When Operation Nightfall began, these viruses would simultaneously attack every connected system in the Zephyrian Empire and create chaos that would last for hours. Kevin looked at his team of cyber warfare specialists and felt confident that this part of the plan would succeed. They had tested their viruses against captured Zephyrian equipment, and the results had been perfect every time. The aliens relied so heavily on their computer networks that losing them would be like cutting off their ability to see and hear during battle. War Commander Thek Val stood on the observation deck of his personal fortress on Zephyr Prime and watched the celebration preparations with satisfaction. Ships arrived from across the Empire bringing warriors who had conquered dozens of worlds in the name of Zephyrian glory. The humans had been so easy to defeat that Thek Val had decided to make their surrender the centerpiece of this year's festival. The War Commander had ordered most of his occupation fleet to return to Zephyr Prime for the celebration. Only a small force remained around Earth to maintain control over the human population. Thekval saw no need for a large military presence, since the humans had shown no signs of resistance, and their primitive technology posed no threat to Zephyrian forces. Commander Steve Johnson conducted the final briefing for Shadow Fleet pilots, in the hidden asteroid base where their ships waited for the signal to begin the attack. Each pilot knew their role in the mission and had practiced the attack patterns until they could execute them perfectly even under the most difficult conditions. Steve looked at these men and women and knew that they represented the best of human courage and determination. The Shadow Fleet would travel to Zephyr Prime using quantum drives and emerge from quantum space at precisely calculated positions around the planet. Their first targets would be the orbital defense platforms that protected the Zephyrian home world. These platforms would be destroyed using quantum torpedoes before the aliens even knew they were under attack. Dr. Rachel Kim supervised the loading of quantum torpedoes onto the Shadow Fleet ships. Each torpedo had been calibrated to exploit specific weaknesses in Zephyrian ship design that intelligence teams had identified. The weapons would pass through alien shields without being detected and explode inside enemy vessels, where they would cause maximum damage to critical systems. Rachel felt nervous excitement as she watched the final preparations. She had spent 15 years developing these weapons, and now she would finally see them used in actual combat. The torpedoes represented humanity's greatest technological achievement, and they would prove that human engineering could match anything the aliens had created. Captain Julie Thompson led the assault team that would target the orbital defense platforms around Zephyr Prime. Her squadron consisted of 12 of the most advanced ships in the Shadow Fleet, and each one was armed with enough firepower to destroy a small moon. Julie had studied the layout of the alien defenses until she knew every detail by memory. The orbital platforms were massive structures that could generate enough energy to destroy entire fleets, but they had one critical weakness. Their power cores were located in the center of each platform, and they were protected only by standard Zephyrian shields. Once Dr. Foster's shield disruptors brought down those defenses, the platforms would be defenseless against human plasma cannons. Colonel Ryan Davis reviewed the intelligence reports one final time to make sure his teams had not missed any important details about Zephyrian capabilities. His people had been analyzing alien technology and tactics for months, and they had identified every weakness that could be exploited during the attack. Ryan felt confident that the intelligence was accurate and complete. The Zephyrians followed predictable patterns in everything they did, and they had never encountered an enemy that could match their technology. This combination of arrogance and inexperience with equal opponents would be their downfall. They expected their enemies to fight using conventional tactics, and they were not prepared for the innovative strategies that humans had developed. Commander Tony Rodriguez prepared the liberation forces that would free Earth from Zephyrian occupation, while the main attack took place at Zephyr Prime. His teams were hidden in underground facilities around the world, and they were armed with weapons that could penetrate alien armor and disable their advanced equipment. Tony had been planning this operation for 2 years, and every detail had been rehearsed countless times. The liberation of Earth would begin with simultaneous attacks on every Zephyrian installation on the planet. Human forces would use adaptive, camouflage, and AI-guided weapons to eliminate alien positions with surgical precision. The occupation forces would find themselves fighting enemies they could not see or understand. Dr. Amanda Foster made the final calibrations to the shield disruptors that would bring down Zephyrian defenses during the attack. Her devices had been tested against every type of alien shield technology, and they had never failed to achieve complete disruption within seconds of activation. Amanda knew that her invention would be crucial to the success of Operation Nightfall. The shield disruptors would be deployed by both the Shadow Fleet and the Liberation Forces on Earth. Once the alien defenses were down, human weapons would have clear targets, and the battle would be decided quickly. Amanda felt proud that her scientific work would help free humanity from alien oppression and show the galaxy that humans were not the weak race they appeared to be. At exactly 23 hours and 47 minutes, Earth Standard Time General Chris Taylor gave the command that would change the course of galactic history. Operation Nightfall began with the activation of quantum drives throughout human space as the Shadow Fleet prepared to emerge around Zephyr Prime. At the same moment, Liberation forces on Earth received their orders to begin the attack on Zephyrian occupation forces. Commander Steve Johnson felt the familiar sensation of quantum travel as his flagship emerged from quantum space just outside the orbital defense perimeter of Zephyr Prime. Around him, 49 other ships of the Shadow Fleet materialized in perfect formation, each one invisible to Zephyrian sensors and armed with weapons that could destroy targets many times their size. Steve looked at the alien homeworld hanging in space before him and knew that the next few hours would determine the fate of both human and Zephyrian civilizations. The Festival of Conquest was in full celebration on Zephyr Prime, and thousands of alien ships filled the space around the planet. Massive orbital platforms generated spectacular light displays, while Zephyrian warriors gathered to honor their recent victories. War Commander Thek Val stood on his fortress balcony watching the festivities and feeling proud of the empire he had helped to build through conquest and intimidation. Captain Julie Thompson led the first wave of attacks against the orbital defense platforms that protected Zephyr Prime. Her squadron moved through space like ghosts, striking their targets with quantum torpedoes before the aliens even knew they were under attack. The platforms had been designed to withstand assault from conventional weapons, but they were defenseless against technology that could pass through their shields and explode inside their power cores. The first platform died in a brilliant flash of light that illuminated half the planet. The explosion was so powerful that it destroyed 2 celebration ships that had been docked nearby. Alarms began sounding throughout the Zephyrian fleet, but their sensors could not detect the human ships that were systematically destroying their defenses one platform at a time. Dr. Kevin Brown activated the cyber warfare viruses that had been hidden in Zephyrian computer networks for weeks. The activation signal traveled at light speed through quantum communication channels and reached every infected system simultaneously. Within seconds, the entire Zephyrian command structure began to collapse as their computers turned against them. Communication. Systems failed throughout the alien fleet, leaving ship captains unable to coordinate their responses. Navigation computers began providing false readings that sent vessels on collision courses with each other. Weapons systems targeted their own ships, while shield generators shut down without warning. The chaos spread through the Zephyrian forces, like a plague, leaving them blind and helpless in the face of the human attack. On Earth, Commander Tony Rodriguez led the Liberation forces in simultaneous strikes against every Zephyrian installation on the planet. Human soldiers emerged from hidden positions wearing adaptive camouflage that made them nearly invisible to alien sensors. They moved through Zephyrian bases like phantoms, eliminating guards and destroying equipment with weapons that fired guided projectiles capable of penetrating any known armor. The lunar mining facility where Paul Anderson had been gathering intelligence became one of the first targets to be liberated. Human forces stormed the complex using neural disruptors that shut down alien nervous systems without causing permanent damage. The Zephyrian overseers found themselves paralyzed and helpless as their human slaves suddenly became their captors. Captain Nicole Wright coordinated the ground assault on Zephyr Prime itself, as human forces used quantum transportation to appear directly inside key military installations. The aliens had never encountered enemies who could travel instantly across vast distances, and they were completely unprepared for attacks that bypassed all of their defensive perimeters. Nicole led her team into the Central Command Complex where Zephyrian military leaders were trying desperately to understand what was happening to their forces. The humans moved through the facility with precision and efficiency, disabling security systems and capturing key personnel. Within minutes, they had taken control of the entire complex and gained access to the military networks that controlled Zephyrian forces throughout the galaxy. War Commander Thek Val watched in horror as his orbital defenses disappeared one by one in massive explosions that lit up the night sky. His communication systems were dead, and his ships were firing on each other as their computers provided false targeting information. The mighty Zephyrian fleet that had conquered dozens of worlds was destroying itself, and Thek Val could not understand how such a thing was possible. Dr. Rachel Kim monitored the performance of her quantum torpedoes from Luna Base and felt satisfaction, as each weapon found its target with perfect accuracy. The torpedoes were exceeding all expectations and proving that human technology could match anything the aliens had developed. Ship after ship in the Zephyrian fleet exploded as the weapons penetrated their hulls and detonated inside their most vulnerable systems. The shield disruptors, designed by Dr. Amanda Foster, were performing flawlessly as they brought down Zephyrian defenses throughout both battle zones. Once the shields were disabled, human plasma cannons could destroy alien ships with single shots. The weapons that had seemed so primitive to the Zephyrians were revealing their true devastating potential. Admiral Lisa Carter arrived at the captured Zephyrian command center on Zephyr Prime and began broadcasting surrender demands to the remaining alien forces. Her voice carried across quantum communication channels to every Zephyrian ship in the galaxy as she offered them the same choice they had given to humanity. They could surrender immediately or face complete destruction. The battle was over in less than 4 hours, but the shockwaves would continue for years to come. The Zephyrian Empire that had dominated this part of the galaxy for centuries had been destroyed in a single night by enemies they had dismissed as primitive and harmless. Their home world was occupied, their fleet was scattered, and their command structure was in human hands. President Martha Lewis addressed the people of Earth as dawn broke over a world that was finally free from alien occupation. She announced that humanity had not only liberated their own planet, but had also captured the Zephyrian homeworld and ended the threat of alien invasion forever. The species that had appeared weak and defenseless had proven that appearances could be very deceiving. War Commander Thek Val sat in a human detention cell and tried to understand how his empire had fallen so quickly. The humans he had dismissed as inferior had revealed technology and capabilities that surpassed anything the Zephyrians had achieved. He realized too late that the greatest predators were often the ones that looked harmless until they decided to show their true strength. The first rays of dawn broke over Earth as President Martha Lewis stood before the cameras to address not only her own people, but the entire galaxy. Behind her, the smoking ruins of Zephyrian installations served as evidence of the impossible victory that humanity had achieved in a single night. The occupation that was supposed to last forever had been ended by a species that their enemies had dismissed as weak and primitive. Martha looked directly into the camera and spoke with the authority of someone who had just changed the balance of power in the galaxy. Citizens of Earth and peoples of the galaxy, I speak to you today as the leader of a free world. The Zephyrian occupation of our planet has ended, and their empire has fallen. We have proven that no species has the right to enslave another, and that even the mightiest can be brought down by those they underestimate. Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the captured Zephyrian flagship and looked out at the space around Zephyr Prime, where the debris of an entire fleet drifted, in silent testimony to the speed and completeness of the human victory. Jake had begun this story as an explorer making first contact with an alien race, and now he found himself in command of the most powerful warship in the galaxy. Admiral Lisa Carter worked with Zephyrian leaders who had survived the attack to establish the terms of surrender. The aliens who had once demanded tribute from humanity now found themselves begging for mercy from the species they had tried to enslave. Lisa maintained the same calm demeanor she had shown during first contact, but now it was the Zephyrians who appeared nervous and uncertain. The surrender negotiations took place in the same room where War Commander Thek Val had first demonstrated Zephyrian superiority to the human representatives. Now the positions were reversed, and it was human technology that dominated the space while Zephyrian equipment lay broken and useless. The tables had turned so completely that it seemed like a different universe from the one that had existed. Just 24 hours earlier, news of the Zephyrian defeat spread throughout the galaxy at light speed, carried by quantum communication networks that the humans had captured intact. Species that had been conquered by the Zephyrians began to rebel against their occupying forces, while others who had lived in fear of invasion started to hope that freedom was possible. The galaxy was changing, and humanity had become the catalyst for that transformation. Dr. Alex Turner emerged from Luna Base and looked up at the Earth hanging in space above him. The planet that had been occupied by alien forces just hours before was now free, and its people were celebrating in the streets of every major city. Alex had spent 30 years preparing for this moment, and he felt both relief and pride that the long years of secret planning had finally paid off. The hidden facilities where humanity had developed their advanced technology were no longer secret. Dr. Rachel Kim gave interviews to news reporters explaining how the quantum torpedoes worked, while Dr. Amanda Foster demonstrated the shield disruptors that had made the victory possible. The world learned that their scientists had been working in secret for decades to protect them from threats they never knew existed. Commander Steve Johnson brought the Shadow Fleet back to Earth, where they received a hero's welcome from crowds, who finally understood what had really happened during the occupation. The ships that had appeared from nowhere to save their world were crewed by people they had known all their lives. Neighbors and friends had been training in secret to become the warriors who would free humanity from alien domination. War Commander Thek Val was brought before a tribunal of species that had suffered under Zephyrian rule. Representatives from dozens of worlds testified about the brutality and oppression they had endured while the alien empire expanded across the galaxy. Thek Val listened to their words and began to understand the true cost of the conquests he had once been so proud of. The former war commander finally spoke when asked to explain his actions. "We thought we were bringing order to chaos and civilization to primitive worlds. We believed that our strength gave us the right to rule over others. I see now that we were wrong and that our empire was built on cruelty and injustice. The humans have shown us what real strength looks like, and it is not what we thought it was." Captain Nicole Wright was appointed as the first human administrator of Zephyr Prime, where she worked to establish a new government that would represent all the species the Zephyrians had conquered. The planet that had once been the center of an oppressive empire became the headquarters for a galactic liberation council dedicated to preventing future wars of conquest. Dr. Kevin Brown's cyber warfare team worked to repair the damage their viruses had caused to Zephyrian computer networks. The same technology that had been used to defeat the aliens was now being employed to help rebuild their society and integrate them into the new galactic community. The humans showed that they could be as generous in victory as they had been, determined in battle. President Martha Lewis addressed the Galactic Liberation Council in its first official session held in the former Zephyrian capital. Leaders from hundreds of worlds gathered to establish new laws that would protect the rights of all sentient species and prevent any one race from dominating others through military force. Humanity had become the champions of freedom for the entire galaxy. The revelation of human capabilities sent shockwaves throughout known space as other species realized they had seriously underestimated the quiet race from the outer rim. The technology that humans had developed in secret was decades ahead of anything other civilizations had achieved. The species that had appeared primitive were actually among the most advanced in the galaxy. Admiral Lisa Carter was promoted to head the new Galactic Defense Force that would protect member worlds from future threats. She stood in the command, center that had once belonged to War Commander Thek Val, and looked at displays showing peaceful commerce flowing between worlds that had recently been at war. The galaxy was entering a new age of cooperation and mutual respect. Captain Jake Morrison reflected on the journey that had brought humanity from first contact to galactic leadership in less than 2 months. The humans had appeared weak because they chose to appear weak, not because they were actually inferior to their enemies. Sometimes the greatest strength lay in being underestimated by those who confused appearance with reality. The Age of Zephyrian. Tyranny was over-ended not by a long war of attrition, but by one perfectly executed night that had changed everything. Humanity had proven that intelligence and careful planning could triumph over brute force and arrogance. The species that had been dismissed as harmless had become the galaxy's new guardians and the protectors of freedom for all sentient life.